I came with the expectation in the second trip to understand the real dynamics of climate change and its impact on heritage. And I was very much focused that, having seen the Ras festival for the 4 days, having observed the people, community, tourism, I was very keen to know how we can save and protect the heritage, the cultural heritage of Majuli. And for that purpose, my emphasis for this trip after October was to focus largely on climate change and its impact on the heritage, cultural heritage of Majuli. This time, the team members were largely people like Martin Smith, who is a renowned geologist from Edinburgh, from the British Geological Survey. I brought him on board. I brought in Professor Mallikarjun Joshi from Banaras Hindu University. That's two famous and quite renowned geologists, to really understand, to help us understand what is this flooding all about. Not just the flooding for flood's sake, that there is sediment, etc., to also understand the real science behind floods. There is a science behind climate change. There's a science behind floods. I think sometimes we miss the point that science has a role to play in the explanation and understanding of climate change and of flooding in the Brahmaputra basin. For that purpose, when we came to the Satras, the first day we arrived here, we decided to go to the Satras, because some of them didn't know what the Satra is all about. What is this whole cultural landscape all about? So for me, I wanted to understand the nature of cultural landscape of the Satras, which we got a glimpse last October, November. But this time it was much more specific, because there's not that many people. You have the space to yourself. You can see things in greater detail. So coming to the understanding the cultural landscape of the Satras, the Namghars, the monastic orders, etc., it was really crucial that we understand the whole setting of this Satra. And each Satra is different. It has its own generic Namghars and the monastic order, the houses for the Bhakats. But for us to understand that each of them are sited in different places, and the reasons why they have been located in particular places and not in other places. Okay, so those were important issues. And even to understand how the Sanctum Sanctorum has been set up in such a way that if everything disappears under the flood, something is saved. And for me to get to the core of what is saved and how do they make efforts to save that Sanctum Sanctorum, for me that is a motivating question. So with my team of experts, scientific experts, I brought them to each Satra to understand, okay, the floods have come, let's look at where the flood, how far the flood waters have come up. That is something which sometimes we forget in the larger debate and question, because these are the people who get affected. So we went first and foremost to looking at the Dakhinpat Satra, the Kamlabari Satra, Uttar Kamlabari Satra, and all the other Satras, to see exactly how far the flood waters have reached, and to again jog the memories of the Satradhikars, jog the memories of the other senior people in the Satras, to get some insights into the oral history of floods in the region. When we were discussing with the Satradhikars, we got a sense that, it was not a discrete random approach to siting or establishing a Satra. It was very clearly thought through, that they had a high ground, that if something happens, they could move to a high ground. So this was a cultural landscape built by very clear design, with a clear philosophy and a clear purpose. For us today, as people who are trying to understand the tradition, we have to ask ourselves the question, what is the future for Satras in the next 50 years, 100 years? And I think the responsibility for that lies not just with the Satradhikars, but with all the members of the community to say, do we want this tradition to continue, and for how long? Third day, we decided to take a ferry across the Brahmaputra to really understand what happens in the extremities of Majuli Island. Okay, so we went across to the Potters Colony to understand again a group of people who are living very close to the river. And because they live so close to the river, to understand how do they cope with the floods, how do they cope with the restrictions on their livelihood, how do they cope with schooling, how do they cope with disease, how do they cope with the continuous erosion which is also affecting their livelihood opportunities. So this was again very important for us to see how far deep down they are able to dig for clay, which is critical for their existence. They are kumhars. Their life is not based on books and papers. Their life is based on preparing clays and pots, which makes the idols, which makes so many items which are of incredible importance, not just to the people of Majuli, but to the people of Assam. From there, we moved to looking at how far the embankments have shifted. And it is again quite important that embankments are just byproduct of floods. We think embankments have been there before. I don't think so. Embankments are a byproduct of floods. As the river meanders across the floodplains of Assam, it cuts and it adds. So everywhere it cuts, the same soil is added, deposited. So one thing which we found was fascinating is that wherever the government has built embankments, artificial embankments, there is a deposition on the other side. So if you look at the sandbanks that are emerged, it's largely the chars that have emerged, it's the deposition from the artificial banks. So we only hope and pray that the artificial banks will be able to sustain, are able to maintain their strength despite the heavy floods. We have to bring the youth into this whole activity that we are doing. It's not enough for us to just do it and go, but to maintain some sense of continuity. So Majuli being declared as a carbon neutral biodiverse region, I was very keen that we should be able to bring the children, the youth into this activity. So my workshop that I'm proposing is basically having a workshop in Majuli College to raise awareness about the detrimental impact of plastics. Plastic, people have said, we can't ban all plastics. But I said, if you really look at the most problematic aspect of plastic is polythene bags, plastic water bottles. If you look at the island, so they are not biodegradable. Today's exercise was largely to get the students to participate in the understanding of reusing materials which are indigenous. The whole emphasis of today's workshop was to raise awareness about plastics and how harmful plastics are for the global environment, for the environment of Majuli, and how necessary it is to ensure that plastics are banned in order to reaffirm the importance of a carbon neutral Majuli. Carbon neutral Majuli is only possible if we remove plastics from our daily consumption. And the biggest challenge is single-use plastics, that you use plastics once and is left into the environment, discarded into the environment, pushed into the rivers, dumped into the rivers. So with the youth, who's the future of this country, youth who are the future of Majuli, they will take responsibility to enforce a ban on plastics, starting from the place of learning, into their homes, into their community, into the satras, into the rest of Majuli and into Assam. Majuli should become the model for Assam in order to ensure that plastics do not become part of our daily life, but the culture and tradition becomes part of our daily life to ensure sustainability and future sustainability of Majuli. Going to the dairy village and the mission was amazing because we got an opportunity to again partake in their culture and tradition in terms of food, in terms of dance, in terms of music, and the earthiness, the lively earthiness of the community who have learned to live with the floods of Brahmaputra. And it's absolutely incredible to see that side of the story. It is the human story like these which really helps us, transforms us to know that we have a responsibility not just to control flood, we have a responsibility to protect the culture and heritage. And each of these people's culture and heritage, the Satras, the Satadhikars' culture and heritage, the Bhagats' culture and heritage, the Mishim's culture and heritage, the Deori's culture and heritage, the Sonoval's culture and heritage needs to be considered more properly and needs to be accommodated and brought together to really preserve and conserve the tradition and heritage, cultural heritage of Majuli. There is two elements, preservation and conservation of the heritage, both tangible and intangible. The preservation is in terms of allowing the continuity of the heritage. The conservation side is where things are deteriorating over the last 400 years, how to stop further deterioration, how to ameliorate those degradation in the heritage. So whether it's the buildings, whether it's the pots and pans, whether it is something which is kept within the Dakhin Path Satra, wherever the materials are kept, how do you look at all of those materials? Those are things which we have to understand. So in terms of the People's Museum, my perspective was that the People's Museum should provide a composite perspective. A People's Museum where you have, because everywhere the narrative is that whenever the floods come, we take our cattle, we take our heritage and we go up to the high point and wait for the floods to go down before we bring it back. So in that respect, we wanted to have a People's Museum which is a concrete fixed structure which should not be destroyed by river, hopefully, if we have such a technology available. But along with it, we also have other elements of the People's Museum where you are able to bring representative materials for 6 months or 2 months, and it's not imposed on anyone to do that. No one feels threatened that the entire collection is going to go there. So it will be taking in and out. So people in the Satras have a namghar, they have a performance house, an auditorium. So there is a space to perform. But for the people who are adopting the traditions, the Deoris and the Mishims and others who are also part of the traditional culture, they don't have a space. So I want to have a performance space that they can also come and highlight their traditional culture and performance. People's Museum would be a composite museum which brings in people and communities and all the Satras. But also within the People's, we also have another establishment which I call the World Center for Arts and Crafts, where you have master craftsman training opportunities for people to learn the art and craft of training. Not everyone can be trained artists, but those who have the desire, the jigyasa, the desire to become artists can come and learn, and this can be open as a world center for art and craft. One of the things which came to me and which was expressed in a very simple manner by a great poet from the dairy village, he said something interesting. He said the embankments have come and our children now don't know how to swim in the river. It is a really telling story that while the floods have receded, while the floods have disappeared because of the huge embankments, their tradition and culture, their ability to survive floods are diminishing day after day. He says, yes, it is good to have no floods, but at the same time, we do not know what to do with the water now. We don't have any more water buffaloes because we cannot take the buffaloes to the water. We do not have access to that river anymore, except through floods. So it is, in a way, there's a different side to the story, which we don't normally hear from when we talk to the flood control board, when we talk to the erosion board and the embankment board. I have proposed that we would like to put in a bigger grant to work on Majuli, but for that we need to have a complete 3D modeling of the island, not just of the Brahmaputra basin, using LiDAR technology. And I hope that the government of Assam and the government of India will be able to provide us with the support to do a complete LiDAR mapping of Majuli Island to understand the depth of the island and to understand how the floodwaters behave in different parts of the island, so that we can get a sense of the elevation of how the floodwaters come and how far it recedes, etc. So that's one part of it. The second, of course, is in terms of the understanding the local and the regional morphotectonics and the fluvial geomorphology of the Brahmaputra to understand the floods. For that, we need to do a coring of 100 meters depth in the island to understand the provenance of the materials, the sand and the clay, so that we can understand what's the source of these materials. How strong are the embankments when we use these materials? Because if there's a major flood, then those embankments, with the weaker parts of the embankments, will go, and that will have devastating effects on the people. The other, of course, is in terms of the earthquakes and the tectonic movements, and we have seen, speaking to all the others, Satradikas and others, they're continuous tremors. We do not know what happens below the surface of Majuli. We do not know what happens below the surface of the Brahmaputra basin, but there are clear evidence that morphotectonic movements is also playing a role in the changes in the courses of the river, and that we have to study scientifically. We have to understand it scientifically before we can make any general policy statements. And the last point, of course, is in terms of erosion. National Disaster Management Authority needs to be informed, and we have to make a concerted effort through the Flood Control Board, through the Brahmaputra Board, etc., to see how we can provide all the materials to support a change in the policy, to add erosion as part of the National Disaster Management Policy, to provide compensation for the people of Assam, compensation for the people of Majuli and the rest of India as far as erosion is concerned. It is important for me to really raise the awareness, and I know that when I go back, I will be in a position to take this at a global level, and we have already started the policy, the program of raising awareness at the global level, at the national level, at the international level, and I will continue to do that for a long time to come.
Dugo juyo dubu mesa judini himoya Sa higa kire dini higa hangna kolopana labing na kebe kebe o joring na kebe Odiai mosijo sada garea